Awesome. Thank you very much. Welcome everybody to October 24th, Salem and the Urban Rural Agency's Finance Committee meeting. I'm your chair, Jose Gonzalez, member, and I'm going to give this moment for anybody that wants to introduce themselves as far as the other members, please.
Well, you gave us the option.
Yeah, and I'm hoping you take it.
Okay. Virginia Stapleton, Ward 1 City Councilor.
Linda Nishioka, City Councilor, Ward 2.
Mickey Barney, City Councilor, Ward 8.
All right. Thank you very much. And so approval of minutes. Looking for a motion.
I move
Everybody's had a
approval of
chance
the
to-
minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Virginia. Any second? Mickey.
Well, I had a question on them, one little correction, so I didn't know whatever.
Yeah. What's it? Yeah. What's your question?
I mean, it's a minor detail. It's just the spelling of Vanessa's name.
We'll get that fixed.
Okay, I know it's really minor. That was the only thing I saw. Everything
I
else looks
appreciate
good.
that.
So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Mickey. Would you also be the one that seconded?
Sure.
Or is it just... Sure, second. Okay, Mickey seconds. Okay. Any other questions or comments on that? Okay, well, accept the minutes, approval of the minutes. Anybody sign up for public comment? Josh?
No, not today.
Okay. Forever, but okay, thank you. Action items. Oh yeah, so Josh, is this going to be you? It's going to help us go through the new procedures policy?
Yes, that's correct. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Josh Eggleston, Chief Financial Officer. I'm happy to walk through this in as much detail as needed. So we've had a draft policy for a while and a good practice of compliance after we issue bonds, but this codifies it. So this puts it in writing, formal procedure recommended by the Finance Committee, adopted by the City Council. It really sets our expectations and your expectations for compliance after issuing bonds. So it really signifies to potential investors in our bonds, proper procedures after we issue debt. So it's been reviewed by Dan, the legal department, and also our bond counsel, our external outside counsel. And I'm happy to walk through any pieces of it, but I just want to introduce it and see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Josh. I mean, the question comment I have is, is what we have pretty standard? Anything unique about our policies and procedures here, or the compliance part of it?
Excellent question. Some of it is unique to us, some of the titles and things like that, but we actually replaced whole sections from our draft on the recommendation of our outside counsel, just with some boilerplate language that they had, that they recommend for municipalities.
Any other questions or?
Yeah, I have one, Jose, or sorry, Chair.
Yes.
Thank you. So Josh, I emailed you because I read this thing and then I read it again and I was like, is it just me, or is this like just not something that I'm gonna like take into my brain and fully understand? So I emailed you and said, let's have a meeting, but of course you and I didn't, we couldn't find time to connect over this weekend. So hearing you explain it a little bit more is good. I am thankful for the chair's question because that's also helps me understand it a little bit more. But I guess, yeah, I guess maybe if you could just, can you speak to that at all? I mean, is this like foreign language to somebody like me, or is this something that I should be getting and I'm just not? How about that? How's that for a question?
Good question. So if I can boil it down, it's not something that's easy to understand. There's lots of different moving pieces. A lot of it is, legal jargon, some language that's in there just because we need to have it there for compliance. And then for us, what we'll do is we'll break it down into pieces, specific tasks that need to happen. We'll have a calendar, checklist, things like that will break down the individual actions, for compliance. A lot of it's annual. So after you issue debt, you have annual requirements until the debt's expired. So in some cases that could be 30 plus years. So it's, you're not wrong. It's complex and complicated, and there's a lot of moving pieces.
We might have lost the chair. So Mickey, why don't you go ahead with your question?
Okay, I had a couple of questions more on specifics. One was on section 4, the private activity monitoring. There were a number of items listed under there, and I was wondering, how will those be monitored and documented?
Great question. So as you might be aware, we have to monitor for private activity because we issue tax exempt bonds. And there's certain IRS regulations because of that. We have to make sure that the bonds are used for public use. In some cases, there can be some small portions of private activity. So as far as the mechanism for compliance, we really haven't gotten to that piece yet. We have some practices put in place, but what this policy will do for me and my staff is we'll look at those again. We'll come up with some procedures, checklists, kind of calendar reminders, to look at this on an annual basis. And then it also creates, I thought it was a pretty novel idea, disclosure group. So coming up with a group of city staff, that work directly on each bond, to know, hey, this is the subject matter expert. They're going to know if there's any private activity that we might have missed. On the finance side, maybe the use it's proposed to change, so we can raise our hand and say, hey, we can't just change the use after the fact while we still have bonds outstanding.
Okay, that explains a lot. I mean, it's good to have a procedures manual. One other question, sorry, is on section 5 on B, about at the end of it where it says the chief financial officer shall report said remedial actions to the finance committee and the urban renewal agency if recommended by the city manager. So my question is, I guess, why wouldn't this be reported to the finance committee? And then is there a threshold or something that determines when it gets recommended by the city manager?
Yeah, good question. Some of this language was boilerplate. So if that's something this body is not comfortable with, we can take that piece out. That's not an issue for us. I think it just gives some, call it some leeway for the city manager if it's something small that it's not reported to it's not material. It doesn't need to be reported to the finance committee. But if you're not comfortable with that, we can take that sentence out there.
Okay, I'm not necessarily uncomfortable with it. I just wanted to have a better understanding of it. So thank you.
Keith, did you want to mention anything
I
on
was
this
just
point?
going to add that I concur with Josh's response. If the committee feels that's important, then we certainly can modify that language accordingly. I don't have any objection to that.
Member Seafold.
So what if we change that language? Could it be, so I'm I'm having flashbacks to when we changed the process for how folks got fee waivers and how it just like opened up the floodgates at council, and we had to just deal with each of these individually, and then we had to change it again because we couldn't, that wasn't what we wanted, right? So is this change, could that trigger just a lot of, I mean, I heard you say that it kind of depends. It could be just something really small that just needs to get done and not come before this body. What is the risk in changing it? I guess that's my question.
In my opinion, it's very minimal. I would hope that this doesn't happen ever, so I would say in a bond issue, you might not see it in 30 years, that kind of rarity, that we have that kind of gross receipts issue.
I also want to recognize Member Nordic who joined our meeting several minutes ago. I think for me, Josh, I'm trying to think of what the role of the finance committee meeting. I mean, the finance committee with, we get the bond passed, the people that are looking at these compliance, what would they want to see from the finance committee? Would they want to see more involvement, less involvement, some check-ins? I mean, what's the process there? So we're making our process looks attractive, but also, we're not hearing about something once it's too late.
Yeah, I can definitely appreciate that. And that's one of the reasons, if this body doesn't want that little middle step, it's perfectly fine to take it out. That's not an issue. And just in full disclosure, a lot of municipalities, a lot of entities, this would be an administrative policy. So it would be implemented by staff. I think it's important that it's a council policy, which is one of the reasons you see it here. So that might be one reason why there's that little bit of language there.
Mickey, Councilor Varney, what we could always do too is we can, instruct staff to maybe look at that again. I'm not sure if it's something we need to pass today, Josh, or what you need from us today. If it was just more for us to review it, give you some feedback, and then it can be modified a bit. Any other thoughts from any other of the members?
I just wanted to mention, thank you. I don't really feel it needs to be changed. Now that I understand that it's a very, very rare occurrence, and I'm sure if something popped up, we would probably hear about it anyway. So I'm personally fine with it the way it is.
Member Varney, gracious of you, and thank you for bringing it up. Yeah.
And if I may, Mr.
So on
Chair,
number 4, excuse me.
just to speak real quick to next steps. So
Yes.
the ask for the recommendation is to forward it to City Council for adoption for their consideration. So that would be the next step, is just a motion to recommend it to the City Council.
Okay, so I'm asking if anybody wants to make that motion.
So moved.
I'll second
Thank you,
it.
Member Stapleton. Thank you, Member Varney. Okay, so you have your recommendation, Josh. Member Nordic. Yes.
What are we moving to do? I arrived a couple minutes late and I don't know what so moved means.
So on, if you look at number 4, agenda item 4,
Uh-huh.
and you look down at the proposed policy, we had a chance to review that, because the goal is to recommend that policy move forward for adoption by the City Council.
No, I had not had a chance to do that today. I was in meetings all day at the day job. So,
Oh, that's fine.
yeah.
That's fine. Josh, would you want to take a few minutes to explain to Member Nordic a little bit of what you sort of shared with us earlier?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a proposed post-issuance compliance procedure policy. So basically, it's everything that happens after we issue bonds. So all the compliance to the public, to potential investors, to City Council, the Finance Committee, kind of all the steps and processes that come after you issue the bond. And this is really, to formalize practices. We have a lot of this stuff in place, but this is just to formalize it as a City Council policy.
Okay. So the motion is to do as staff suggests, which is to have the Finance Committee and the URA recommend to City Council and the URA Board adoption of the proposed post-issuance compliance procedures policy. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Nordic. So if there's no other concerns or questions, then yeah, Josh, you have your recommendation. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, on to number 5, management update information items. Number 1 will be the ARPA updates. Number 2 is historic revenue analysis and property taxes in Oregon presentation. So I'm looking forward to that too. So I'm gonna hand it back to you, Josh.
Thank you. And for these first 2 items, I'm happy to address any questions. We also have Jenny Matichek, our chief accountant, who put the ARPA update together here to answer any questions you might have. I'm also happy if you guys want to take it and review it and send us any questions you might have. There's a lot of information there.
Mhm.
I think the biggest takeaway is that of all the ARPA funds, the vast majority has already been expended. And there's a small portion left, and that's on, if you're looking at page 23 of the package, you can see that there's a small portion, $378,465 left of unallocated ARPA funds. And then that second line is almost $300,000. And I'd recommend just leaving that as unallocated. We're waiting until the navigation center is fully constructed to see if more funds are needed there. But there's that other small portion of unallocated reserve funds, and that's just leftover savings from your initial allocation.
So yeah, Chair, I have a couple questions, if that's all right.
Yeah. Definitely.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. So what I'm reading is it says remaining funds available is $2,047,309. And then after that, immediately, well, technically we do have that money, but what city staff is saying is that we already have plans and they're proposing plans for the remainder of it, is how I'm reading that. The next line says 1.37 has been approved to fund sheltering projects in fiscal year 2023. Council could always change its mind about how to make funding suggestions in 2023, right, Josh?
I'm going to put a caveat on yes. The difference is for the approved sheltering projects, we've already issued contracts for those funds. The 1.37 million, as included in the budget, those contracts have been awarded and those projects are in place. This is just a depiction of, hey, this is actually cash as of 6/30. The reality is, we're a few months past 6/30, and a lot of those dollars are already expended for the Church at the Park subawards, particularly.
Okay. So in other words, the 1.37 million, we've already issued contracts that cover all of those funds with Church of the Park.
Church of the Park, United Way, and Center for Hope and Safety, yes.
Got it. So after that, the remaining actual unspent balance is almost $700,000 or $677,508. Is that correct? That's what the report says anyway.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, got it. So those are funds that we could use for any approved ARPA purpose, correct?
That's correct, if it's allowable by the ARPA guidance. Yes.
Okay, great. And have we ever checked into the ARPA? Now I know ARPA, taking a step back, ARPA included creating a fund for mobile crisis units across the country. So it's my assumption then that these funds could be used if we want to start a crisis unit. We could use ARPA funds for this purpose, correct?
I'm going to defer to Jenny. Jenny, have you looked into that specific question?
I haven't looked into specifically to the mobile crisis type project. The way the Treasury put out the guidance for this, they really lump it into projects. But based on my understanding of the projects we've seen and eligible uses, I would definitely feel like that would be an eligible use. We would just have to stick to the procurement and cost principles that are required for audit purposes.
Okay. And so, yeah, I'm asking you to shoot from the hip, and I know no one prefers shooting from the hip. Can we find out with some, can we get confirmation of that to find out whether that would be a permissible use for the remaining $677,508? That would be great. Thank you. I would just add that we know from prior council meetings, council's already appropriated some money to start a mobile crisis unit to the tune of 135. So if we took the 135 plus the 677, that would be more than enough to run the program for the pilot project that we've discussed in meetings. So just wanted to throw that out there for food for thought. Thank you. I'll look forward to your research. Appreciate it.
Member Stapleton. Thank you, Member Murray.
Thank you. I think this question is for city manager. I'm just wondering, how close are we really to getting the navigation center open? I know at a couple of meetings ago, we shifted some funds for some unexpected overruns in cost. But how is that project looking? How close are we? And do you expect, with the climate that we're in right now, with escalating costs, that you'll need to come back to council for funds for the navigation center?
I had an opportunity to speak with Gretchen about this on Friday, and she advised me that the opening would likely to occur in January or February timeframe. So that is behind schedule. We were anticipating that it may open in November. That's not going to happen. There have been delays in regards to construction and acquisition of HVAC equipment. We've been able to come up with some workarounds, but I think the best that we're going to do is an opening sometime in the beginning of the new year.
Okay, thank you. And then Josh, this one might be for you. How far out are we? Do we have funds to support the functioning of the actual running of the navigation center? I know that we have some state funding for that. But I know it's in that beautiful little color coordinated Excel spreadsheet that you made for us. But can you remind me again, how much money do we have set aside right now to run that facility?
We have slightly less than $5 million. And actually, the action you spoke about, to boost the contingency on the navigation center, that's where that $300,000 came from. Is kind of, we're not actually transferring it, but just allocating it in case it's needed. But that's about 2 years of operations. I know that the budget's kind of been around, as we discussed with a potential operator, what the services look like, but it's about 2 years of operations.
So just to clarify, the 5 million that we have is for 2 years of running that facility.
Correct, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Member Stapleton. Any other comments or questions on that section? Okay.
Sorry,
Member Stapleton. No.
I will say that it was really great to get an update on the ARPA funds. It went out and everybody just, it was so exciting when it came in and things were so crazy. And I know that folks, especially the budget committee, I think the members of the budget committee would really appreciate getting this handout emailed to them if that's possible, because I know that it was just a lot of money coming through, and we want to make sure that the oversight is good and that the community knows where their money was spent. And so getting that information to the budget committee, I think, would be really good. And it was just really nice to go through and read and find out where we were at and what we were looking at. So thanks so much for pulling that all together. It was really great.
I can't take credit. It was Jenny. She's made sure that we're compliant with all the regulations. She's attended all the webinars, seminars, and all the guidance. I don't know how many pages that would be, but it's been a bit of a nightmare.
I make a motion. We all clap for Jenny.
Agreed.
Thank you
Jenny
very
is
much.
amazing. Jenny is amazing. She is fabulous. Sorry, I just had to pipe in and say that.
Thank you
Yeah,
all
you
for
can
your
always-
patience in getting this to you guys. The compliance and reporting is very complex. So now that we've spent the money, hopefully that compliance and reporting that burden will go down. But yes, I appreciate your patience in getting this to you guys.
Thanks again, Jennifer. And Member Stapleton?
Were we ready to move on to the at-risk revenue analysis?
Yeah, it would have been right next. And I want to
Yeah.
just thank the staff for preparing this information. It was from our last conversation, so I want to thank you. But yeah, Member Stapleton, go ahead.
Thank you for this. Reading through it over the weekend was really good. What do we do with this? Like, I feel like we're holding it. There's no action item. But I mean, knowledge is power. So that's good that this body has this information. But from a staff's perspective, how can we help? What do you need us to do with this information? Or is it just that we're informed?
I think the more information out there, the better. Just that general awareness of our revenues and the ones that are at risk. I think franchise fees is a big area that we can continue to look at, making sure we number one protect it and then maximize those revenues. On the state share revenue side, this one, this is one where there could be opportunities for the legislative committee to make sure we protect those dollars, or in some cases lobby that we have more potential, say like the local marijuana, increasing that tax there. But mostly just awareness that things are fluctuating. In some cases, some things are going down, which is just generally how it works for some of these.
And this is where I was talking to you about the vaping one. Is that what I was emailing you about, this one? Or was that separate?
So I think there's currently provisions of state tax for vaping. I'm pretty sure we're preempted, just like we can't do a cigarette tax. It's one of those where there's a state share revenue. For vaping, I'm pretty sure that cities don't get a share of that revenue either. But there is already a state tax, and I don't think we can do a local tax.
Okay, thank you.
No, Member Nordic, please.
Thank you, Councilor Gonzalez. So I have a question about highway revenue sharing. I had a constituent reach out to Councilor Nishioka and I to talk about this. His understanding is that the county does not share its highway revenue with the city. And frankly, a large number of cars that are registered within Marion County, there's a lot more registered here in Salem than there would be in, say, Turner or even Woodburn, for example. Josh, do we, and that highway revenue sharing could mean a lot in terms of helping out with the costs of maintaining our streets and such. So I'm just curious, my first question is it true that we do not get highway revenue shared with Marion County? Because that it would be helpful to know whether that's accurate or not.
Yeah, good question. So we do get a share of the state highway revenue fund, just like the county does. They get a separate share than us. And that does go into our transportation fund to fund street maintenance, sidewalks, and things like that. So it's not like we don't get a share of the county. They get a separate share, based on a formula.
Okay. All right. So this, because what he was saying was that there was another example of Multnomah County and Gresham where we're in a position where the county was receiving all of those revenues, and they had to actually create a law to essentially force them to share with one of their cities. It sounds to me like we don't need that kind of legislative fix because we're already getting our appropriate share by formula. Is that fair to say?
I believe so. I can look into that particular instance, reach out to Gresham to see if there's something that I don't know about Multnomah County, which I'm sure there's plenty I don't know about it. But I can find out to see if there's something unique, and I can get back to you.
Sure. What I'll do is I'll forward the email from the constituents so you know what I'm referring to. I thought it was an interesting question. I mean, I had no idea what those revenues would be or how much of a difference that could make. But, for perhaps for some of the uninitiated, the reason this can be a challenge is that in South Salem, years and years ago, we had all these developments come into play. All these houses were built, but the developers didn't build sidewalks also, which I'm sure was great for their price point. But it also meant that we have tons and tons of neighborhoods now where kids don't have a sidewalk to walk down. Walkers, dog walkers, joggers, and so on don't have a safe place when cars come down the street. But unfortunately, you could spend the entire $300 million bond just on streets and sidewalks in South Salem. I'm pretty sure of that. And that's just not a feasible, that's not the right answer for us. So that's why I'm curious about any sort of highway revenue sharing system. Because frankly, I could think of uses for that, not just in my ward, but I think around the city. So thank you, Josh.
Yeah, if I may, Mr. Chair, just a quick follow-up.
Definitely. Yes,
So one of the revenue initiatives from the Sustainable Services Revenue Task Force, not for the general fund, but for the transportation fund, was a local gas tax. And that's where you could really, it's a local voter initiative where you could, say 5-6 cents a gallon that could really go for local transportation infrastructure. Right now we're not maintaining our streets at an adequate level, which is why there's large portions of capital maintenance in the bond. So more maintenance funding is needed.
Member Nishioka.
Thank you. Josh, when you find that out and reply to Councillor Nordak, would you please CC me as well?
Yeah, of course. I'll include all the members of this committee.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Moving on, Josh, are you be doing the presentation on the property taxes?
Yes, I will.
Okay.
Can everyone see that okay?
Yes.
I thought this would be helpful. I know that it might be repetitive for some of you that are more familiar with our property tax system. But as we move to more talks of revenue, I think it's important to know our baseline, our property tax system, where it's been, some of our limitations, and some of our constraints as we go forward. So feel free to stop me. Some of this is boilerplate information from the league or Department of Revenue, but just feel free to stop me. So I stole this slide, some elements of a good property tax system. And this is, in my opinion, it's not a statement from the city, but stable, equitable, adequate, comprehensible, something you can understand and predictable. Here in Oregon, we have one of those, right? We have a predictable property tax system. It goes up 3% each year like clockwork, but it does fluctuate. It's not stable. There's some definite inequities, both across municipalities and just individual properties. As we continue to talk about revenue, it's not adequate for our needs and all the other revenue initiatives across the state. And then the comprehensible, it's just so complicated. I was speaking to a resident this morning who really didn't want to hear what I had to say, but I was trying to explain the property tax system and the assessed value and the real market value. And I even pulled up his tax statement and it just wasn't going to get across. We just have such a convoluted system. You've heard some of these before, I'm sure. Pre-Measure 5, Measure 5, and then Measure 50. Pre-Measure 5 budgets were, the tax levy rates were pretty simple. You would just take your general fund budget and divide it into the market value in the district, and you'd have your tax rate, and that would adjust each year. There were some limitations depending on the municipality. They could have some local, something in their charter or a local initiative that would limit the amount of increase or the base or something like that. But it really was kind of an open market, right? People levied what they need. And one of the things that caused is some pretty massive tax increases. For example, the average statewide tax went from 1905 and 1980 to 2665 in 1990. And there were, in that time period, there were 5 failed votes to limit property taxes. The first one that passed in 1990 by a 52% margin and took effect. And we still have these limitations today. It limits general government to 1%, or that $10 that you'll hear per thousand of local government, and then the 0.5% or $5 per thousand for schools. This is when the first time we saw compression, so if you were outside that limit, everything got smaller to fit into that limitation. Not specific to us, but it did also shift the majority of the K-12 funding from local property taxes to the state. And this was really the first time that we saw competition between districts, so within that $10 limit, we're vying for the same tax dollars as the county, any special districts, library districts, and anything like that. With Measure 50, and just real quick, there was a pre-Measure 50. It was called Measure 47, approved in 1996, but it didn't work. So there was a pretty immediate passage of Measure 50, which just added some limitations to the Measure 5 limitation. So it created the permanent rate limits. I'll talk about that more in a second. It created that predictability, so that assessed value growth by 3% annually. And then it limited local voters' ability to increase taxes through local option levies. So before, you could increase your taxes, local vote, no problem. It could be a permanent tax increase. In this case, it funnels all that into a local option levy. And then it kept those limits, the 1.5%, the $10 for general government, $5 for schools. So one thing that did, so you can see a lot of fluctuations. This is just a look back to 1972. You can see that the pre-Measure 5 with the levy system, there was a lot of fluctuations, a pretty massive drop with the Measure 5 limitations, and then a pretty significant stabilization after that. That where's that predictability comes in. So this is where it continues to be complicated, but the Measure 5 assessed value is the lesser of real market value or your maximum assessed value. And all this is to say, if for some reason your real market value, the price you could sell your house of, dips below your assessed value, what your taxes are based on, it rebases at that maximum assessed value. So it dips down and then it goes back up from there. And then the other thing that we pay attention to pretty closely is that new construction goes on at an average ratio for property type in the area. So what that means, these are two different lines. One is the assessed value and one is the real market value. So the orange one is what your property taxes are actually based on. And the blue one is supposed to be your real market value. So what you could actually sell your house for. So that's where, in 97, it went down, and then it has been increasing at 3% since then. Definitely some fluctuations. During the recession, you saw some properties get compressed. But overall, you've seen the spread increase between the assessed value and the real market value. The permanent rates, you'll hear about these a lot. They're recommended by the budget committee and then approved by the city council every year, but it's not a different number. It's a permanent rate. So it was kind of a strained calculation. So it took the 97 levies. So these were set after or before the passage of Measure 50. It was reduced by 17% and then divided by 90% of the 95-96 market value. So pretty convoluted calculation to get to our permanent rate. And it was all based on the rates at the time, right? So those few years really impacted the permanent rates. One thing to note, they can't be changed by voters, right? And that's where the local option levies come in. Require voter approval. They're temporary, they have to be approved. If it's capital every 10 years or operating every 5 years. And then levied in addition to permanent rates. And then it compresses first. We'll talk about that more in a second. We kind of went over this a little bit, but the Measure 5 rate limits, $10 for general government and $5 for education. That's important here in Salem, and I have a slide to show that. One thing to note, especially with our proposed bonds, bonds levies are not compressed, so there's no compression. They're outside of those rate limits. A couple of problems with the current system. So with Measure 5 and Measure 50 in place, I talked about the tax inequities between properties, between neighborhoods. Rate inequities. In some cases, there are some counties that back in the mid 90s, they were heavily relying on timber revenue. So they actually had a very small property tax levy. And when those timber revenues went away, they didn't get an increase in their property tax rate. So their permanent rate is set, well below $1 in some cases. Then the compression losses, competition between districts, and then not all voters pay. So you could vote for a measure and then not actually have to pay it if you know your property is in compression. This comes into play in Marion County. It doesn't actually come into play in Polk County. So the combined government rate here in Marion County is $10, for the current calendar year, $10.40. And then in Polk County, $9.54. And how that math works is basically, so say your real market value is $210,000 and your assessed value is $200,000. Your Measure 5 limit at that $10 per thousand is based on your real market value, so $2,100. You apply the government tax rate, $10.40. Your tax based on that calculation is $2,080, so you get to pay those $2,080. The difference is if you have no spread between real market value and assessed value, so your assessed value is $200,000, your real market value is $200,000, you don't have any wiggle room, so you can only go up to $10. So what that means is your levied tax, so the county, us, everyone else, they levy this $2,080, but the property only pays $2,000, so everything gets compressed after that. So if you have a local option levy, it gets compressed first and it goes away 100%, and then it does a proportional compression after that against all the different districts. This is just property tax compression, Marion County, City of Salem, since 2000. So you can see back in 2000, we had very little compression. And if you remember back to that assessed value, real market value graph, they were pretty close together right then. So there were really properties in that situation. But you can definitely see going forward, the large increase in compression during the Great Recession. And then coming down, we've stabilized around this $400,000 mark for the City of Salem in Marion County. And as I mentioned, there's no compression in Polk County because the government rate is below that $10 limit. Specific to Salem, just to highlight some of the property inequities. So this is something that people are surprised when I mention this. So these are two different houses in Salem. One sold for $365,000 in February of 2021, and the other for $387,000 in November of 2021. Two very different assessed values, just based on what they were assessed back in the 90s when they froze that rate. This one pays over $5,000 in taxes, and this one pays about half of that at $2,500. So just to highlight some of those individual property inequities.
So Josh, I have a quick question, and I apologize if you've already covered this. Why is it that the assessed value lags behind by such a huge margin? Is that something that can be fixed? Because it's a huge swing.
Yeah, it's a great question. The why is really because our tax system with the passage of Measure 50 was disconnected from the economy, right? It was completely pulled away and artificially frozen, and then it limited that growth at 3%. And it's really challenging for people to understand, hey, I just sold my house for X 100,000, but that's not what I'm being taxed on, right? It's really hard for people to grasp that. But that artificial, that assessed value, we even talked to Tim Dewey, he's an economist with U of O, and he did a pretty in-depth analysis. And, even during the recession, it was predictable, it was stable. We still had a few issues with compression, But we didn't see much down or decline in property taxes because of this stable system. On the inverse, we don't see much increase, right? We see 3% plus a little bit of new development. So it's really limiting, but it's also a benefit because it's so stable. And then as far as how to change it, so those were statewide measures approved by voters, and it would take additional statewide measures approved by voters to change the property tax system. I don't think the legislature is going to do that. I monitor it pretty closely. It comes up every few years. I know the League of Oregon Cities has looked at a few different options for property tax reform, but it's really not apparent to most people that there's an issue. Most municipalities like us, we've limited the impact on individuals. We keep mowing the grass. We keep showing up at your house if you call 911. Most people don't realize there's a problem, but I really anticipate that changing in the next 10 years. There's going to be service issues going forward, and not just the city of Salem. I think it's across the board in Oregon.
Has the assessed value ever been higher than the fair market value? It seems like it has historically lagged for quite some time.
Good question. So if the real market value dips below the assessed value, it becomes the new assessed value. So it's built into the system where if your house is valued at less than your assessed value, it resets at that lower level. So that's why sometimes you can see compression last for longer because of that reset. You can't get back to where you were before.
Thank you.
That's a good question, Member Nordic. And real quick, I want to make a comment that, during the Great Recession, and when people would go online and see their assessed value, I don't know how many people filed appeals to get their assessed value less than their market value. And that was, I don't know how many people did that, but it was a lot of people that tried it. So yeah, this is the chain reaction this issue causes is up there. Member Nishio.
Thank you. I was wondering if a constituent asks, how does one go ahead and make that appeal? Or do they have to have their property market valued? Somebody come in and give a market value and then try to appeal it?
I'm not familiar with that process. The Marion County assessor would be the one to make that distinction. With the current spread in real market value and assessed value, I wouldn't think it's near as common as it was back during the Great Recession or early when this was implemented. There's quite a spread now for, in general, most properties.
Thank you.
Thank you. Josh, I think when I was at League of Oregon Cities, they were talking about some new laws in California that they're trying to work with so that it resets every time there's a sell, right? Is that what and for us, it's just frozen in time and never changes. But in other states, every time there's a transition, then it resets at that current level. That would be something that the state of Oregon could look into. It has its own problems as well, but it is better than what we have, ?
There's a lot of opinions on reset at sale. It is something that's apparent in a lot of other states. It's not something that has been implemented here. It would take a vote of the people to do it. And again, there's pluses and minuses there. It presents a challenge when someone goes to sell a house. It makes, hey, it's going to reset at whatever price. So we get a lot of pushback from the real estate community. But what it does do is it helps, if you're retired and on a fixed income, as long as you don't sell your house or move, your property taxes are fixed at that lower level. It's only when you go to sell the house that your taxes change.
Any other questions or comments on the presentation?
My last slide, I don't need to pull it up, but basically, property taxes, they grow at 3% plus a little development, so around 4.1 is what we see on average And of course, you all are aware our costs increase faster than that 4.1%, which is one of our challenges. And it's really rooted, back in those measures 5 and 50, so we can't talk about the current issue without looking back a couple decades at what happened before and the limitations that really voters put in place at that time. Thank you.
Good. Member Nordic?
Thank you. I meant to ask you this earlier, Josh. I'm going out of order. Returning for a moment to your agenda item regarding general fund at-risk revenue analysis. I just had a question about the marijuana revenues. I see that on the one hand, marijuana state shared revenue dropped by over 65% between 2018 and 2022. But apparently we have a separate tax here in Salem that is disconnected from Measure 110, and that revenue has grown to 1.02 million. And I just wanted to make sure I understood. The sentence reads in page 26 of our packet, between fiscal year 2018 and 2022, this revenue grew over 134%, or 1.02 million. Are you saying that was the total growth over those 4 fiscal years? And my next question would be, how are we spending the city taxed marijuana revenue?
Good question. I'm just trying to verify. So looking at the marijuana sales tax, the local one, we implemented it in partway through fiscal year 2017. Initially we saw 750,000. It's now, last year closed at 1.8 million. So it's a pretty steady increase over the last several years. In 2020, it was 1.16, and 22 is 1.8. So a pretty sizable increase on the local marijuana tax. I know that the state shared revenue saw a similar increase, but you're right, Measure 110, it diverted and capped what the city would expect to receive for that revenue source.
And the follow-up question I had was, did council direct how that revenue would be spent, and which city department is the beneficiary of those funds?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Sorry, I missed the part 2.
No worries.
It's dedicated to police patrol, and that's part of the budget committee recommendation and the city council adoption each year for that state shared revenue.
Okay, and to make sure I understand, it actually has increased. It seems like the last couple of years it's been over 1.5 million in revenue each year. And right?
Yeah, this most recent year closed at 1.8. Yes.
Okay. All right. Interesting. So it seems like it's steadily climbed. I don't know if sitting at home with the pandemic had anything to do with that, but do we know where we are at right for this calendar year? Are we on track to continue to grow thus far? Or actually, let me change that. I know we're on a fiscal year, so I should probably be a little more clear. Are we on track to see even more growth above the 1.8 million from the last fiscal year, if you know?
I don't know off the top of my head, just looking at it. I know we have a lag. So we get receipts, in the current fiscal year for the prior fiscal year, then we accrue it back. I think we're on track to hit that number again in the current fiscal year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Member Nordic. Any other comments on number 5, A, B, or C from the members? Okay, see no. Number 6, continue business. You had something for us, Josh, a question?
Yeah, it's actually under number 7, but I guess it is both. So it's meeting days and times.
Oh.
In the past, this has been, I think, like a Friday lunch meeting. I think during the pandemic and shortly before, I think it was moved to a Monday before your council meeting just for convenience. But I also understand that for staff and for council, it could be a lot, in one evening, and a lot of materials to prepare for, depending on the business for this committee and then also for city council. So just a question of, is this the right time? And then also, is there a desire to go back to in-person meetings also? So just a question for the committee.
Member Stapleton.
Thank you. I will say that the meeting at 4 o'clock before council meeting is a little bit challenging because it makes for like 6 hours in front of your computer, in meetings by the time the night is done. So I would be interested in moving it or seeing how the committee members feel about handling it in a different way. In person or online is fine with me either way.
Either feedback for Josh. Member Nordic.
Sure, I'm happy to share my feedback. This time works for me, but I'm flexible on that. Fridays are typically not a good day for me. I strongly prefer virtual. I work from home 4 days a week, so the drive time is a significant time addition for me. And it's also less environmentally sustainable for more traffic to be on the roads. Yes, I do drive an EV, but even that, I get my juice from somewhere. So I have a strong personal preference for continuing to meet online. I'm not noticing a failure to communicate or interact or engage with my peers in this committee or with staff. So I strongly prefer it because it's easier for me to segue from my work duties to this and then to dip back to council meetings. So I strongly prefer if we can continue to meet online or at least a hybrid option. I would certainly welcome that, but that's my personal pitch and I would love to hear how my peers think.
Thank you, Member Nordic. For me, online. Member Nishioka.
Thank you. I would say that online works well. It does save time and energy moving about. I'm happy to meet at times, or if there was a subcommittee or if I had specific questions that I might want to just meet with staff, those would be great in person because sometimes that's a dialogue that you need to kind of continue. But these meetings, I think, would be nice to keep online. I do agree with Councillor Stapleton. It is a really long, tough time, 4 o'clock. And I mean, it's like all Monday. So if we could find either an off Monday or another day of the week, that might work better.
That's perfect. Thank you, Member Nishioka. Any other feedback for our wonderful staff here? Member Varney.
Thank you very much. I prefer virtual. I do work from home Monday, Thursday, and Friday. Tuesdays and Wednesdays would not be good for me because I don't have the same access to a computer to use on those days.
Perfect. Does that help, Josh? I mean, I agree that the off Mondays is a great idea too. Maybe we can mess around with the times a little bit, but it seems like virtual is the way to go. I agree. Mm-hmm.
Sounds good. So is there a consensus around off Mondays, picking, I'm not sure which one would be because you still have work sessions, I guess the first Monday would be available, right?
Member Nishioka. Mm-hmm.
So I think that on the work sessions, they're generally a little shorter. So I would be okay with it be going in front of a work session because we'd have a little break and then, but we'd have a more compressed time load. So I think instead of adding an extra Monday, let's try to condense it and have it on that work session Monday. So that's generally the third Monday of the month. Is that correct? I think that would be my preference. I think I'm getting nodding heads. So that's really all I have to say.
Yeah, sounds good. And I have to apologize, everybody. I have to leave in order for us to make our executive. In this case, like Member Stapleton said, when timing is throwing us off a little bit. But any other thoughts, Josh? Did you gather a member of Varney?
Thank you. I just forgot my comment. I was thinking once we go to in-person council meetings or work sessions, wouldn't it make more sense to do the finance committee meeting in person as well if we're doing it just before the meeting? I was just curious.
I mean, that would be up to this body and Chair Gonzalez if that's what you guys would like to do.
Yeah, I mean, I know that even once we go back into council, my plan is to attend one in person and one online. I think we should stick to something consistent here, especially considering the travel time. And I don't know what kind of staff, the time is going to take for staff to prepare for both of us to do hybrid for these finance. I know that's extra time for the staff, yeah, that'd be my thought. Member Nordic?
Thank you, Councilor Gonzalez, for bringing that up. I know that there will be times when I will have to appear remotely for council because my job requires me to travel statewide to meet with clients and court appearances. I've appeared from hotel rooms in Portland already. And I know that now that the courts are reconvening and I'm having trials again, there will be times where the only way that I will be able to participate in council business is going to be remotely. So, and I want the public to be able to retain that option. I would also add, staff, of course, aren't going to point this out, but many of our staff are on a hybrid work remote schedule too. And so there may be savings for them as well, for us to continue to meet online. I'm hopeful that they're able to, we can make this all work so that we can all participate from our home offices, because saving staff time is important also. Thank you.
Yes, Member Varnia, if you're agreeable to give this a chance, I trust you'll be happy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, I perfectly am. Virtual is fine. I was just throwing the other option out as saving trips, but virtual is fine.
Yeah, deep down, I prefer in person, but just today's world is just changed. So.
Understood. We'll plan on that.
Okay. Anything else, staff member? Okay, it's looking good. I'll see everybody shortly. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.